drafts to do, 2 expansion team drafts, and then obviously the WNBA draft, and then you have over 100 players who are free agents. So it's a lot of things that need to be done. There's also a lot of housekeeping things. And I will say, you guys, this March 10th date is just for them to get a handshake agreement, because Adam Silver also alluded to this weeks ago. He's like, even if we have a handshake agreement, things still have to go through lawyers. It has to be put on paper.
2 weeks. That's all the time left before the WNBA potentially faces its first work stoppage in league history. March 10th isn't just another deadline. It's the date that determines whether we get a 2026 season at all. And what makes this particularly wild is the timing. One day, the league announces players are getting an unprecedented $8 million bonus from revenue sharing. The next day, drop-dead date. That's not a coincidence.
So union leaders said that the league notified player leadership earlier this month that they hit the benchmark. The 13 teams will receive a total of $8 million from the league to disperse among players. And $8 million, if you do the math, that's about $50K per player, which is a pretty sweet bonus for these players. Now, this is the first time in WNBA history that they have triggered this revenue sharing model. And I think some people are overreacting to this news. I think overall, the way that we should react to this news is that this is very good news for the league. It means that the league is growing. It means that the momentum that we have all seeing has translated into money for the.
Here's what that $8 million actually represents. For the first time in 29 years of WNBA history, the league hit the revenue benchmark that triggers profit sharing with players. Each of the 13 teams receives roughly $600,000 to split among their rosters. That's $50,000 per player as a bonus on top of their existing salaries. Not bad for a league that's supposedly been losing money for decades, right? But here's the thing, this money comes from the old CBA structure, the one that's about to expire. And the league made sure everyone knew about it exactly 24 hours before dropping that March 10th ultimatum.
From the WNBA side, they come out with the news that the revenue sharing was triggered and the players will get paid. And then the very next day, they drop a drop dead date. I think this is basically the league saying, like, look at this momentum that we have. You guys are actually able to get some of this revenue sharing. Like, you just made $50K that none of you guys were expecting. Do not halt this momentum. We need to get a deal done. Like, I feel like all of this is super, super calculated on the WNBA's part. And I think it's also a way for them to show, like, hey, even if we don't give you gross revenue, you're going to get paid. There is a lot of money to be made.
The strategic calculation here is pretty transparent. The WNBA is essentially telling players, look what you made under our net revenue model. $50,000 bonuses that none of you were expecting. The system works. Don't blow this up chasing gross revenue, sharing that could kill the momentum, because that's what this entire negotiation comes down to. Net versus gross revenue. The players want 27% of gross revenue, meaning they get paid before the league covers any expenses. Travel, arena costs, staff salaries, marketing. None of that comes out first. The league is offering net revenue sharing, where expenses get paid and then players receive their percentage of what's left. The difference between those two models? Potentially hundreds of millions of dollars.
That entire season, and we know that she is the face of the league. She's the biggest draw in the WNBA. Could you imagine if on top of that Caitlin Clark played every single game like she did during her rookie season? On top of that, in 2025 we had the Golden State Valkyries, who was a brand new expansion team. There was so much hype around them. They sold out every single home game. They sold a ton of merch. Like, the Golden State Valkyries exceeded everyone's expectations as their first year in the WNBA, and so it was huge for them. And now think about in 2026, if you continue on the momentum that you have from 2025, which again, the first time they triggered a benchmark was in 2025. Now think about 2020.
And this is where the situation gets complicated. The Players Association submitted their initial proposal back in January 2025. The league took weeks to respond, and that delay was strategic too. Let the tension build. Let the players start worrying about whether training camps will open on time. Let the expansion teams sweat about whether they'll even have rosters. When the WNBA finally countered, they offered a $5.6 million salary cap per team. The players want $9 million, that's a $3.5 million gap per team, multiplied across 15 franchises with the 2 expansion teams joining. We're talking about real money here. But here's what the league has budged on. Full housing for all players, at least for the first few years of the new deal. Better travel accommodations, improved maternity benefits, everything except that revenue sharing model.
League, and then hopefully finally we get a full season of Caitlin Clark basketball. On top of that, because of Caitlin Clark, because of the Caitlin Clark effect, so many more people are invested in so many more players in the WNBA. You have Asia Wilson, once again, coming off another MVP season and also a championship season. People are going to be tuned in to see what she's doing next. You have Paige Beckers. You have the new draft class coming in. There truly is so much momentum that I know I sound like a broken record. We don't want to see that halted. And I think by showing that, like, hey, 2025, like, look what you guys did in 2025, we could also do that in 2026. I do think that this was truly, truly strategic. It was also reported that the WNBA and the WNBPA.
Now think about the context of 2025 that produced this revenue milestone. Caitlin Clark missed significant time with an ankle sprain. The league's biggest draw, the player who moves ratings and ticket sales more than anyone else, wasn't even healthy for the full season. The Golden State Valkyries played their inaugural year and exceeded every expectation, sold out every home game, massive merchandise sales, brought a new market into the WNBA ecosystem. So what happens in 2026 if this momentum continues? You've got a hopefully healthy Caitlin Clark playing all 40 games. You've got not one, but two new expansion teams in Toronto and Portland, both of which have already sold out their season tickets. You've got a Aja Wilson coming off her third MVP and first championship, with a profile that's never been higher. You've got Paige Beckers entering the league as the #1 pick with massive endorsement deals already in place. The revenue potential for 2026 makes 2025 look like a warm-up.
Of $5.6 million per team. So that's the salary cap that the league is offering. The players had sought a salary cap of more than $9 million and a greater share of league revenue. So even that in itself, you guys, league is offering $5.6 million salary cap. The players want a $9 million salary cap. That's $3.5 million extra dollars per team, plus the greater share of league revenue, meaning gross revenue. And the league is continuing to claim that the players' proposed structure is unrealistic and would cause hundreds of millions of dollars in losses for the league and its team. So I actually don't know if they get to this March 10th deadline and there's still not a deal agreed upon.
But here's the problem with this March 10th deadline. Even if both sides shake hands and agree to terms that day, the actual CBA still has to go through lawyers. Adam Silver said weeks ago that process alone takes a minimum of 1 week, sometimes multiple weeks. And until there's ink on paper, nothing can happen. No expansion draft. No WNBA draft, no free agency. Over 100 players are currently free agents with no idea where they'll play next season. The league says the March 10th date is specifically about getting a term sheet completed, so the 2026 schedule doesn't get impacted. But that's generous math. The season is supposed to start in early May. That gives you less than 8 weeks from March 10th to conduct 3 separate drafts, complete free agency negotiations, allow teams to actually build their rosters, and give players time to relocate and start training camps.
That is around the time that Team USA will be playing in those few games against those South American countries. Like, that is around that same time for FIBA World Cup. It's a sticky situation, and I honestly don't have a prediction. I just don't know. I also don't know if they don't happen to come to an agreement by March 10th, if there's any sort of status quo that they can continue doing and they can continue just talking to one another until they possibly get something done. But I will say one of my biggest concerns with all of this is even if they get a deal done on March 10th and they have the 3 drafts, and free agency, I still think that that's so rushed. And even when we talked to Annie Costabile and had her on the show, and she's talked to someone.
And this is where it gets really messy for the expansion teams. Toronto and Portland are at a massive disadvantage compared to what Golden State had last year. The Valkyries knew their roster by December. They had months to build relationships between players and coaches, to start developing an identity and system, to let fans get invested in specific players before the season even started. Toronto and Portland? If a deal gets done on March 10th, they're looking at maybe 6 weeks to figure out their entire franchise infrastructure. That's not how you set up an expansion team for success. That's how you create chaos and hope it works out.
Still better than a season not happening at all or a season being delayed because we still only have around 40 games per season. At this point, I'm just kind of rambling, but that's pretty much the high level updates of everything that is going on in the WNBA CBA. Actually, I lied. One last thing. So Mark Cuban actually posted a tweet. It's very long. You guys can read it yourself, but he essentially said that the WNBA's structure is never going to work out as it is, and it needs to be more like the college structure, more like like an NIL structure. And he also alluded to the fact that like a lot of players build their names in college and are actually making more money in college. Why would they even want to go play professional? And that's just kind of not how it's supposed to be. That's not how it is in any other professional sports. And he kind of mapped out a new way that the business could be ran and the pros and cons of it. Now, Mark Cuban obviously is somebody who's very successful in business. He knows how to make money. He knows how to run a successful business. He's been working with the Mavs organization and working with the NBA for many, many years. So he kind of understands the back end of.
Here's what makes this situation so precarious. Both sides have drawn pretty clear lines. The players have come down slightly from their initial gross revenue ask, but they're still firmly in that 27% range. They've made it clear they're not budging off the fundamental principle. They want gross revenue sharing, period. The league has made just as clear that gross revenue is off the table. They'll negotiate on salary caps, on housing, on travel, on benefits, but not on the revenue model itself. Adam Silver has said multiple times we shouldn't even think about it as revenue sharing. We should think about it as getting salaries as high as possible. So you've got two sides who both claim they won't move on the central issue, which means either someone's bluffing or we're headed for a work stoppage. Now, there was a virtual bargaining session on February 23rd that included over 50 players, union leadership, league staff, and members of the Labor Relations Committee. Both sides swapped proposals last week. The league offered housing for all players but didn't move on the revenue sharing percentage. The players adjusted their numbers slightly but stayed firm on wanting gross revenue. This is what negotiators call a fundamental impasse. It's not about the details anymore. It's about the core structure of how the business operates. Mark Cuban actually weighed in on this with a long Twitter thread, and his perspective is worth considering because he's run an NBA franchise for over 2 decades. He basically argued that the WNBA's current ownership structure makes this kind of revenue sharing impossible. The league owns 42%, the NBA owns another 40%, and outside investors hold 16%. With that structure, you're never going to get to the kind of revenue split that players in the NBA or NFL receive. Cuban suggested the league might need to be completely restructured, possibly moving towards something more like college NIL, where players can supplement their league salaries through individual sponsorships and donors. It's a radical idea, but it speaks to how broken the current model might be. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Even if the WNBA is generating enough revenue to trigger profit sharing, the league still isn't profitable overall. That $8 million going to players, that's great, but it doesn't mean the league made money after all expenses. It just means they hit a specific benchmark in the old CBA. The players argue they shouldn't have to care about profitability. They should get their share of revenue regardless, just like NBA players do. The league argues that's exactly why the WNBA isn't the NBA, and trying to copy that model will bankrupt teams. And you know what? They might both be right. The WNBA has been subsidized by the NBA for its entire existence. That's not an insult, it's just reality. The question is whether that subsidy continues indefinitely while the league grows, or whether there's a point where the WNBA needs to stand on its own financially. And if it needs to stand on its own, can it afford a gross revenue model? These are legitimate questions without easy answers. But here's what we do know. The momentum is real. The 2025 season proved that. The Caitlin Clark effect is real. The expansion into new markets is working. The media deals are getting bigger. The sponsorship money is increasing. This league is on an upward trajectory that hasn't been seen since the first few years after launch. And that's exactly why this March 10th deadline is so critical. If the season gets delayed or canceled because of a work stoppage, you risk losing all that momentum. Casual fans who just started paying attention might drift away. Sponsors might get nervous. The narrative shifts from WNBA is growing to WNBA is in crisis. Neither side wants that. But both sides also believe they're fighting for something fundamental. The players believe they deserve the same revenue structure as male athletes in major leagues. The league believes that structure isn't financially viable yet and could damage long-term growth. So what happens on March 10th? Honestly, it's a coin flip. Maybe one side blinks. Maybe they find a creative middle ground that saves face for everyone. Maybe they agree to a shorter deal that kicks this fight down the road a few years. Or maybe we wake up on March 11th with no deal and no clear path forward. What I do know is this: the players have more leverage than they've ever had. The league needs them more than ever because of how much star power and momentum exists right now. But the league also knows that players need the season to happen. Most of them can't afford to sit out, and the ones who can afford it might not want to sacrifice a year of their prime. It's a high-stakes game of chicken, and we're about to find out who swerves first. Drop your predictions in the comments. Do we get a deal by March 10th, or are we headed for the WNBA's first work stoppage? And more importantly, whose side are you on? Should players get gross revenue sharing even if it risks the league's financial stability, or should they take the guaranteed money on the table and keep building? Because you can't have both. Pick a side.